The first thing everyone noticed about Matthew Collins was his blindness. The white cane tapping softly against cracked concrete. The dark glasses hiding eyes that no longer reflected the world. But what no one noticed, what no one wanted to see, was that Matthew saw more truth in his darkness than most people did in broad daylight. On the morning everything changed. Rain soaked the streets of Cleveland, Ohio, and Matthew stood at the corner outside the old courthouse, unaware that his quiet presence would expose lies powerful people had spent years burying. Before the story pulls you deeper, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of truth. Stories like this only reach more hearts because of people like you. Matthew had not always been blind. Once he had been a construction foreman with strong hands, a steady paycheck, and a modest dream of retiring near Lake Erie with a small boat and a porch facing the water. That life ended one winter night when a drunk driver ran a red light and crushed Matthew's truck into a frozen guardrail. His wife, Rebecca, died instantly. Matthew survived, but shards of glass and nerve damage stole his sight forever. The man who woke up in the hospital was not the same one who had gone to sleep the night before. Grief hollowed him out, and blindness finished the job. In the years that followed, Matthew learned to move through the city by sound, smell, and instinct. He learned which sidewalks sloped dangerously, which intersections echoed differently, and which people passed him with hurried footsteps full of discomfort. Cleveland could be cruel to those who moved slowly. Employers smiled politely and never called back. Friends drifted away, unsure how to speak to a man who carried so much loss. Eventually, Matthew ended up living in a small, subsidized apartment near the courthouse, surviving on disability checks and quiet routines. Every weekday morning, he walked to the courthouse steps and sat on a worn bench. He did not beg. He did not preach. He simply sat, listening. The courthouse was alive with sound, heels clicking with authority, nervous breaths, whispered arguments, the shuffle of fear and power mixing together. To Matthew, it was like listening to a heartbeat. He could hear guilt in a man's pace, arrogance in a woman's laugh, desperation in the way someone's hands shook when they passed too close. Most people assumed he was just another blind man killing time. But Matthew was paying attention. One rainy afternoon, he heard something different. A young man's footsteps were unsteady, pacing back and forth near the courthouse doors. His breathing was shallow, panicked. Matthew recognized that sound. It was the sound of someone standing on the edge of ruin. Over the next few days, the same footsteps returned, always accompanied by muffled sobs and frantic phone calls. Matthew did not know the man's name yet, but he knew his fear was real. The young man was named Jonathan Reed. He was 22, freshly graduated, and standing trial for armed robbery and assault. The newspapers had already decided his fate. Headlines painted him as another violent statistic from a broken neighborhood. Witnesses swore they saw his face. Surveillance footage was grainy but convincing enough for people who wanted an easy answer. Jonathan insisted he was innocent, but innocence rarely spoke louder than public opinion. Matthew heard Jonathan before he ever met him. He heard the rhythm of a soul breaking under pressure. On the day the verdict was expected, Jonathan's footsteps trembled so badly Matthew could hear his knees knocking together. When Jonathan passed the bench, Matthew felt something in his chest tighten. Years of listening had taught him to trust that feeling. Inside the courthouse, the jury deliberated. Outside, rain washed dirt into the gutters, and Matthew sat still, cane resting across his knees. He heard lawyers joking too loudly, reporters rehearsing lines, officers shifting weight with bored impatience. Then he heard something that made his stomach turn. A man's confident stride, smooth and unburdened, followed by a faint metallic jingle Matthew recognized instantly. It was the sound of a heavy watch bracelet, expensive, worn by someone who liked to be noticed. That sound was familiar. Matthew's mind raced backward through memories he wished he could forget. Years ago, before the accident, he had worked on a private development project owned by a businessman named Charles Whitman. Whitman had worn the same watch. Matthew remembered the man's voice, slick with charm and sharp with threat. He remembered safety shortcuts, unreported accidents, and quiet payoffs. And now, standing near the courthouse, that same man laughed softly while speaking to someone on the phone. Matthew heard him say something that made the world tilt. He spoke casually, confidently, about how easy it was to let a desperate kid take the fall, about how the security cameras had been adjusted just enough, about how money always found the right pockets. Matthew's blindness had taken his sight, not his memory. As the courthouse doors opened and the crowd shifted, Matthew stood, heart pounding. He did not know if anyone would listen to a blind man with no proof in his hands. But he knew the truth had found him for a reason. He reached out and lightly touched Jonathan's arm as the young man passed, flinching at the contact. Matthew spoke quietly, explaining what he had heard, what he remembered, and who the real criminal was. Jonathan broke down, clinging to that fragile thread of hope. Against every instinct telling him it was pointless, Jonathan's public defender listened. And for the first time, someone took Matthew seriously. The verdict that day was delayed, then postponed, then reopened. What followed was slow and brutal. Matthew gave a formal statement. Investigators traced financial records, uncovered altered footage, and exposed a chain of corruption that reached higher than anyone expected. Charles Whitman fought back with lawyers and threats, but truth has a way of surfacing when someone finally listens. Months later, the charges against Jonathan Reed were dropped. The courtroom buzzed with shock when the real story broke. Whitman was arrested, his empire collapsing in headlines far louder than the ones that had condemned an innocent boy. Jonathan walked free, his life scarred but intact. Matthew did not attend the press conferences. He returned to his bench outside the courthouse, rain or shine. But something had changed. People noticed him now. Not as an inconvenience, but as a reminder. Officers greeted him by name. A local church arranged better housing. A community center invited him to speak, not about blindness, but about listening. Matthew never claimed to be a hero. He said he simply paid attention when others looked away. He said losing his sight had stripped the world down to its truth, free of distraction and surface-level judgment. He said people revealed themselves if you listened long enough. As this story comes closer to its end, if it has touched your heart even a little, please like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps these stories reach people who might be standing on the edge, just like Jonathan once was. Years later, Matthew sat in a new apartment with sunlight warming his face through an open window. He still could not see the lake, but he could hear it in his imagination. Jonathan visited often, now working as a youth counselor, helping kids no one else believed in. Their lives had intersected for one moment, but that moment had changed everything. Before the final moments of this story, we have one special request. Please comment below and tell us what this story made you feel. Or share one moment when truth or kindness changed your life. Your words matter more than you know. Matthew Collins remained blind until the day he died. But he lived knowing that seeing was not about eyes. It was about courage. It was about listening when silence was easier. And in a world crowded with noise, one blind man had seen the truth clearly enough to save a life and remind everyone else what it meant to truly see.